Bring in show music, please.
This is Squawk Pod, and I'm CNBC producer Cameron Costa. On today's episode, 'twas 8 days before the election, and Madison Square Garden was buzzing with the Trump campaign.
Elon Musk!
Representative Byron Donalds was there before coming to our set.
We don't believe in pure democracy in America. We are a constitutional republic. And the Democrats don't like that because they simply can't get their way when they happen to amass power.
And on the other side of the aisle, former Congresswoman Donna Edwards argues there's a reason for all the vitriol.
Well, when you have a campaign that travels in racism, sexism, misogyny, and hatred, it's not a surprise that this is where you end up.
Where will we end up? The election betting markets don't know the future, but they're hosting millions in trades while we wait. CEO of Kalshi, Tarek Mansour, joins us.
I think we're gunning for number one for the entire App Store by election day.
Those stories, plus McDonald's is cutting the onions, and Boeing is pushing to raise $19 billion. It's Monday, October 28th, and Squawk Pod begins right now.
Stand Becky by in 3, 2, 1. Cue it, please.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Squawk Box right here on CNBC. We are live from the NASDAQ market site in Times Square. I'm Becky Quick along with Joe Kernan and Andrew Ross Sorkin. Here we go.
We have some news just out from Robinhood, the trading platform launching derivative contracts that allow users to bet on the outcomes of elections. So it's now moved to Robinhood 2. This includes next week's presidential race. The new investment product will begin rolling out to a limited number of users. It starts literally at 8 a.m. today. So if you're a Robinhood customer and you want to bet on the election, you can potentially begin to do that if you're part of the group. Customers must be U.S. citizens. They must apply and then meet certain criteria to be approved for a derivatives account. Robinhood is using I think it's called IBKRS, but I don't know how to, if there's a, do you say IBKRS? Not sure. Forecast X for those event contract. So I don't know. Now the betting game has begun in a whole different way, because once you're on Robinhood, it's a next level kind of situation.
Just in terms of trying to lure you in with the...
Well, yeah, just it's a different generation of people who are doing this. It's a whole different kind of game.
Did you see Bikers or Bricks as a jumbo player?
Oh.
I immediately saw Bricks. Is it Bricks? IBK. There's no C, and it's not Bikers quite either. Quite. So it's neither.
Years of playing the game makes you look for something.
I know immediately. Yeah. I did. And doing all the Octurtle stuff. Boeing is planning to launch a capital raise as early as today. That's according to multiple reports say the company could raise more than $15 billion. The reports say advisors have been lining up potential investors in a transaction is likely to include shares as well as debt. Boeing needs the capital infusion to maintain its investment grade rating and fund its eventual recovery from the ongoing machinist strike and everything else that it's been dealing with the past couple of years.
I want to get straight over to Phil LeBeau. Phil, what you got?
Andrew, we have the equity raise that we were expecting, the capital raise. Total of $18.9 billion is what Boeing will be going to the street to raise in capital once they are finished with this. $13.9 billion will be new equity that will be sold, depending on the final pricing of the stock as it's sold. It's going to be approximately $13.9 billion and an additional $5 billion in mandatory convertible preferred shares. So again, $18.9 billion is how much Boeing is raising in this capital raise. Most were expecting it to be 10 to 15 billion, maybe a little bit higher than expected. Not a huge surprise here. I'm sure that this is one of those issuances that is going to be highly subscribed. So again, $18.9 billion is the amount of the capital raise. Guys, I'll send it back to you.
Okay, Phil LeBeau, thank you. We will see the stock off just marginally right now.
So that's going to be very dilutive, obviously. Yep. That much. It just makes me think. So let's say Boeing turns things around and does very well again, and they decide, look, we issued all those shares.
Time to buy back stock.
Yeah. For the way we want to manage our balance sheet, we did that as because we had to, but we didn't want that many outstanding shares. Now, is that okay for the company, or should they be criticized for a buyback 3 years from now if they decide that's how they want to manage their balance sheet? That's the problem with just all buybacks are bad. You know what I mean?
No,
I mean, this is the opposite of a
airlines.
buyback. Is this something we should celebrate? I mean, is this something AOC would say, yay,
Well, no, you wouldn't celebrate this because this is being done in an emergency.
I know.
Look, although
scenario.
I will
But if all
celebrate the
buybacks
idea.
are bad, then all dilutive.
No, but I would celebrate the idea that they're able to raise this.
No, I know.
capital and get it there
You know what I
because
mean,
we
though.
need this
If it's
company to
always
survive.
bad
This
that
is
it's a
very
buyback,
important company.
is it always good?
No, and it gets into the same question with the airlines, right? When the airlines took additional shares that they had to issue to the government and then beyond.
Right, and they're constantly, partying when times are good, and then they're like, oh, what happened when times are bad? Help us out.
I also think you would hope that they wouldn't have to be buying back their shares because they'd be actually investing in the business for a very long time because that's something they actually need to do.
Then issue 30 million or 30 billion.
Maybe you don't need more than that. Maybe you can get it. I don't know.
It's just,
It's a valid question.
I got the question.
Yeah.
Meantime, McDonald's Quarter Pounder burgers, they are going to return to roughly 900 restaurants. That's going to happen later this week after it was pulled from the menu because of a deadly E. coli outbreak affecting restaurants. Will be serving those burgers without slivered onions for the foreseeable future, however. So the burger is back on the menu without the onions as health authorities continue to investigate what happened there. McDonald's said the issue, quote, appears to be contained to a particular ingredient and geography, and it's confident that any contaminated product has been removed from its restaurants and supply chain. The FDA, by the way, we should also mention, investigating whether onions produced by Taylor Farms are the responsible party in this case. McDonald's has stopped using that company as an onion supplier indefinitely.
I wonder if that means no onions on the Quarter Pounder, because
I think that's how I'd order it.
Well, the Big Mac had
A different kind of onions.
Can you put the Big Mac onions on the Quarter Pounder? What was it? They're slivered onions and just what's the other?
Raw,
kind?
I think, aren't they? Were they
on the Quarter Pounder?
Yeah.
I guess some have. You
honestly,
can actually
I've
get
never ordered
the
a
entire onion on when you get a burger,
Slice of
like a P.J. Clark's or somewhere like that. I guess no onions. So if you like onions on your Quarter Pounder, you're gonna have to wait.
Cheese will be next.
Coming up, did you know there was an election coming? We are just 8 days away, and the candidates are heading into closing argument mode. Former President Donald Trump held a rally at New York's Madison Square Garden on Sunday. The speakers and the jokes have a lot of people talking. Congressman Byron Donalds was there at MSG.
We are talking about the comments of a comedian, and everybody's going to forget it in 48 hours. The real joke in America is the terrible policy of Kamala Harris.
And Democrat and former Congresswoman Donna Edwards fires back.
The American people get to decide the direction of this country, and I think the American people are going to decide that they want a direction that's forward-thinking and not backwards.
Two very different sides of our country up next on Squawk Pod.
We must defeat Kamala Harris and stop her radical left agenda with a landslide that is too big to rig.
This is Squawk Pod. Here's Andrew Ross Sorkin.
In political news, former President Donald Trump headlining a rally that took place yesterday at New York's Madison Square Garden. The campaign looking to distance itself from one of the speakers, though, at that rally, comedian Tony Hinchcliffe. He joked that Puerto Rico is, quote, a floating island of garbage.
You know, there's a lot going on. Like, I don't know if you guys know this, but there's literally a floating island of garbage in the middle of the ocean right now. Yeah. I think it's called Puerto Rico.
Campaign senior advisor said the joke does not reflect the views of former President Trump or the campaign. Unlikely to play well, of course, in the battleground of Pennsylvania, which is home to the third largest Puerto Rican population in the continental U.S. Among the other speakers at the rally, billionaire Elon Musk.
I'm not just MAGA, I'm dark, gothic MAGA.
Pro wrestler Hulk Hogan and former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani. The rally coming after Trump's 3-hour interview that took place with podcast host Joe Rogan on Friday. Trump stood by his idea to end income taxes and substitute them with tariffs.
Did you just float out the idea of getting rid of income taxes and replacing it with tariffs?
Well, okay.
Were you serious about that?
Yeah, sure, but why not?
Former President Trump and Vice President Harris making some of their last economic pitches to voters in the waning days of the presidential campaign. Joining us now on those proposals, Florida Republican Congressman Byron Donalds and former Maryland Democratic Congresswoman Donna Edwards. Good to have you both on. And Congresswoman, I'll start with you. Just getting right down to brass tacks. Do you think it's okay to get rid of the filibuster and stack the Supreme Court? Are you in favor of both of those proposals, which we've gotten more clarity on? I think both things are possible in a Kamala Harris presidency.
Look, I think it's actually important that we have legislative rules and tools that allow government to move forward. And in recent years, we've seen that the filibuster has actually been used to stymie debate rather than to move it forward. And so I think it is time for reforms to the filibuster and other rules in the Senate that in particular keep legislation from moving forward. Yes.
That would mean a couple of maybe scary things. D.C. would probably become a state. Supreme Court, I don't know what that would do. It would become almost a legislative branch. Wealth tax would probably pass at that point. I mean, there are real things that would happen if you end the filibuster that need to be thought through. And then when the other, when your side is not in, and the other side doesn't have to filibuster, God knows, at that point, it might be like what we did with judges, where suddenly Democrats are like, oh my God, what happened with what happened with the Supreme Court or some of the lower courts?
Look, we've already seen that the Senate, especially under Republican control, has actually used the rules to bastardize the process. And so I think it's time for reform. The American people expect us to govern, and it's really impossible to govern when you have a constraint on the rules like the filibuster that don't allow legitimate legislation to come to a vote. The Voting Rights Act, immigration reform, border control and security. I mean, these are pieces of legislation that deserve to be heard by the American people and deserve an up or down vote. And frankly, the filibuster keeps that from happening. And so I do favor reforms. Now, I mean, there are ways that you can do reform that have more limited application. I'm open to considering those sort of things, but we have to change rules to make sure that we are doing the business of the American people. And right now, the Senate and the House, frankly, are not functioning.
The business of the American people all sounded like Democratic things for the Democrat Party business. But at least we know that's, I think by putting that forward so bluntly, that it gives people a choice of what they want.
Well, look, quick response. It was just mentioned about that the Democrats want to do, quote unquote, immigration reform. Well, the bill that Kamala Harris and Joe Biden put forward when they first came into office, which was a radical expansion of immigration, massive pathway to citizenships, direct amnesty, Nancy Pelosi wouldn't put that bill on the floor. How do I know this? Because I was a member of the House when they came into power. She wouldn't even put that on the floor of the House for an up or down vote. That's how radical that bill was. You want to talk about the Senate, quote unquote, bipartisan bill on immigration that Kamala Harris says that she would sign, a bill that would codify 1.8 million illegal immigrants into our country every single year, on top of the 10 to 15 million already in the country right now. It couldn't even pass the Senate. The Senate couldn't get that bill through. And by the way, that bill would have never got a vote on the floor of the House because Speaker Johnson and Leader Scalise said first before anybody else that bill was dead on arrival in the House of Representatives.
What else would happen if the filibuster went away?
Right.
What are we looking at in terms of all we just talked about?
You are looking at a situation where we are now majority control in our nation. Look, the Senate filibuster frustrates both sides of the aisle, let's be perfectly honest, but it is there to protect the will of the minority in our country. The framers understood that we are not a mobocracy. We don't believe in pure democracy in America. We are a constitutional republic. And the Democrats don't like that because they simply can't get their way when they happen to amass power. Remember what happened the last time the Democrats didn't have to worry about the Senate filibuster. They had 60 votes. What did they do? Dodd-Frank, one of the worst pieces of financial regulatory policy in the history of our country. We don't have community banking in America today to the scale that we had before 2008 because of a one-way Senate controlled by the Democrats. And now you have a situation where small businesses don't have the access to capital that they need because our banking system is frankly too top-heavy because of overregulation out of Washington, D.C.
Congresswoman?
Look, all I can say is this. First of all, when it comes to immigration, a majority of the House and the Senate have supported strong border security legislation that could have been signed by the president, but for being blocked by the minority. This is not the way the country was envisioned to run. And look, do I think that sometimes rules can apply to one party when it's in power and then turn on its head when another is in power? Absolutely. But that is actually part of the design. So I'm not afraid of that. And I do think that we have key pieces of legislation that have been sitting on the sidelines because a small but vocal minority in the House and in the Senate control the levers. And that is simply not fair to the American people. And look, in come the November election, the American people get to decide the direction of this country, and I think the American people are going to decide that they want a direction that's forward-thinking and not backwards.
Congressman, you were there last night. I was looking at different, depending on which cable channel you watched or which newspaper you look at the cover of the day. On the one hand, let's go to the other side. I saw a black and white on another cable network, a black and white video of 1939, and that this is what's happening right now in Madison Square Garden. On the other hand, on another channel, I saw almost participating in the MAGA rally in terms of what you want to call it. What you were there? What you got both covers, Andrew?
Well,
you got the post cover.
Let me see this. This is interesting. So this is the Wall Street Journal. They just have the big picture, but they say economists warn of potential for inflation following election. You can look at that one. Sure. This is the MAGA Square Garden.
MAGA Square Garden. That's
MAGA Square Garden.
That's a great one, actually.
That's the roof.
Fears over what follows Election Day. So we're into the fear category.
On both sides, yeah.
Washington Post.
You got the Daily News.
Interesting.
Head.
We haven't talked about the Washington Post, by the way, and everything that's going on over there.
Daily News has racist rally.
Racist rally.
So time out, but before you go any further.
Well, you were there. Were you there for the whole time?
I was there the entire time. So to the New York Daily News, is it a racist rally if you have a black man from Florida who's originally from New York speaking at the rally? I don't think so. This is the problem with most media today. They're too busy trying to fearmonger everything it's instead of actually talking about the facts and the substance. It was a great rally last night. Donald Trump obviously spoke. Did he say something that was off color? No, he did not. I spoke. Did I say something off color? No, I did not. Eric Trump, Laura Trump, Don Trump Jr., Elon Musk, Howard Lutnick. Did they say anything that was off color?
The
no,
campaign
they
itself
did not.
distanced himself from the comedian who was there and the comments that he made.
I didn't agree with the comedian said. None of us did. When it came out, we were all like...
The campaign distanced himself.
Yeah, of course. We were all like, wait, what? Who? Did that get up? No. Nobody agreed with that. Nobody.
But it was
period. Full
people
stop.
say I saw.
But he's also a comedian. We didn't control.
But it was
what he
in
said.
the prompter. Did the campaign know it was going to be in the?
The prompter was not used by everybody.
It wasn't used by everybody.
No, everybody did not use the prompter. Some people used the teleprompter. I didn't use the teleprompter. Some people did. Some people didn't.
Okay, but so the Associated Press, Trump's Madison Square Garden event features crude and racist insults. That did happen. You may not have been the one making them, but that did happen.
And Becky just said it. The campaign has distanced themselves from it. They do not agree.
I understand.
I do not agree.
I have a question.
Unfortunately, it was said. But nobody agrees with that.
But I have a question for you.
Sure, go ahead.
And this is what I think. To the extent that there are folks who, by the way, may agree with the policies of Trump,
yes,
but don't want to vote for Trump, and those some of those people. The reason that they don't want to vote for Trump is because they see, either in his character or the people who seem to support him, seem to be engaged in that or willing to engage in that, right? Because what you don't see, you don't go to other rallies for Harris or see in a Harris rally that kind of vitriol. It just you see. Look,
you don't.
I don't think you do.
Kamala Harris spends half her time talking about her rival as Hitler. After he's been, there have been attempts on his life, not once, but twice. She's doing it right now. Every Democrat official at these rallies refers to him as Adolf Hitler. You got Hillary Clinton running around there hawking her book that nobody wants to buy, frankly. And she's talking about how this is akin to 1939. Are you out of your mind? You want to talk about rhetoric? Let's compare, but let me go back. We are talking about the comments of a comedian. And everybody's going to forget it in 48 hours. The real joke in America is the terrible policy of Kamala Harris. Let's talk specifically about Puerto Ricans in America today. Puerto Ricans have had to live under the same inflation unleashed by Kamala Harris. And that's not a joke, but they got to live with it. Puerto Ricans today are living under the same terrible border policies that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris unleashed. That's a terrible joke on the American people. We should be focused on that.
I'm not disagreeing with you on that front. I'm just saying, to the extent that you can speak to those people who are out there watching who say, you know what, I agree with the Trump policies, but I just can't abide by reading headlines like that.
In America today, and I don't want not to cut you off, but in America today, we have to decide, are we going to be trapped by the headlines of a media who, quite frankly, is in the tank one way or the other, or are we going to look at the actual policies that matter in your life? No, because this matters. You can't take it out. But you
take the headlines out.
But you can't. You raise headlines. You can't take it out. We have to decide as Americans: are we going to be caught up in what media says to us, or are we going to talk about the reality facing our nation? And the reality facing our nation is we are seriously in decline because of terrible leadership in Washington, D.C. Those are the facts.
Congressman, I can appreciate all of that, but it was the campaign that put this comedian on the stage instead of talking about the facts that you're talking about. And you can look at social media to find all of these criticisms of it, too.
No, so listen, I criticize it myself. Social media is going to do that because the Harris campaign is pushing that because they're looking for something to talk about. Because she has nothing to talk about. Because when she goes out and talks, she says absolutely nothing. You all know this. She's not answering the issues facing the American people. So she goes try to find a comedian's point at a rally. I don't agree with it. The campaign doesn't agree with it.
Can I just say this?
But the issues we talked about half of it.
We could stipulate and you could decide that you think she doesn't have the right answers, and that's something that people can make up their own mind about. But I think there are people who watch the videos of either that comedian, by the way, the fellow who's on the radio, some of the other comments, and people just watch that. It's not the media telling them to watch it. You watch it and you say to yourself, this is not a great situation.
Watch Donald Trump. He's the one running for president, and he has the prescription to put this nation back on track and make it great again.
All right. I'm glad we had you on. You were there. So Congresswoman Edwards, I don't know whether you wanted to weigh in on any of that. That's a good head shake anyway. We can glean from that, but
well, when you have a campaign that travels in racism, sexism, misogyny, and hatred,
Donna, you know better
it's
than
not
that.
a surprise that this is where you end
That's
up.
Not true.
It
That's
matters who
not
you
true.
surround yourself with, and
That's
Byron
simply not
Donalds
true.
knows that.
That's simply not true, and you know that. You should be ashamed of
Insulting.
yourself. But thank you.
Okay, Congressman Donalds, Congresswoman Edwards, we appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you both.
Up next on Squawk Pod, betting on this year's election is a $2 billion industry, and prediction markets are weighting towards the former president. We hear from the co-founder of the first legal site for Americans to wager on outcomes, Kalshi's Tarek Mansour.
I think people are confusing the odds that these markets are giving us with polling. It's a coin flip with a bias.
And we're back. This is Squawk Pod.
Up and Becky, Q.
You are watching Squawk Box right here on CNBC. I'm Becky Quick along with Joe Kernan and Andrew Ross Sorkin.
News out from Robinhood this morning. The trading platform now officially launching its own derivatives contracts that allow users to bet on the outcome of elections. I shouldn't say they're their own. They're using an outside group to do it, but including this week's, or next week's, I should say now, it feels like this week's presidential race. The new investment products begin rolling out to a limited number of users. It starts at 8 a.m. this morning. Customers must be U.S. citizens. They must apply. They have to meet certain criteria to be approved for a derivatives account. Robinhood is using Interactive Brokers' Forecast X for the event contracts. But here at the table, the guy who started it all, election betting, a startup, Kalshi, has recorded over $80 million in trades on the presidential election after the company listed its U.S. legal betting market earlier this month. Joining us right now is Kalshi CEO Tarek Mansour. Good morning. You are now, I was looking on the App Store because you mentioned it. Like he's beating most of the apps on the App Store.
Really?
Kalshi. It's kind of a crazy situation. So tell us what's happening. How many people have you onboarded since this all began, and what are you seeing?
Yeah, well, I mean, the demand has exploded. So we have actually in all election markets now, we have, I think, close to $200 million traded already. We are now number one on the finance app store. We just overtook Cash App, which has had the spot for I don't know how many years now. And on the global app store, I think we are just about to reach number 10. So we just overtook Facebook, Uber, Spotify, and a few other apps. I think we're gunning for number one for the entire app store by election day. So the demand curve is truly exponential, and we're seeing, as of this week, I think we're in the hundreds.
And what are the amount of bets that people are making?
So it's a very large diversity, and it's been interesting because people have been saying, you know, that the odds are up, the Trump odds are up because there are a few whales that are pushing the odds up.
Right.
So I cannot speak about unregulated offshore companies, but you know we are regulated onshore, only Americans. And on Kalshi, actually, the average bet size is slightly larger for Kamala Harris than for Donald Trump. So it's actually more bettors betting on Donald Trump than they are on Kamala Harris.
And what are the amounts of these bets?
So it ranges. The average bet size is around $300, $400. But there are people that are doing in the millions. So people that are doing.
But the fears of what we talked to you about seem to be borne out by the French whale with 4 accounts or whatever. But then it turned out it was only $28 million versus billions. It was 0.1%. And it really looked like it was some French guy who thinks Trump's going to win and wants to make $28 million is what it looks like. Or is it definitely being manipulated by someone who wants Trump? I was kidding. I said it was the French guy. Elani Mosquet was the guy making but it's not Elon. Probably.
It's not Elon. So it's important to differentiate, and I say this always. So prediction markets now are starting to have many flavors. You know, that you announced there's more competitors coming up, which is a good thing.
Which I want to ask you about.
Yeah.
What the implication of that's going to be for you?
No, I think that's great. I mean, I think it's a bit like, you know, crypto 10 years ago. You started seeing a lot of operators, some good ones, some bad ones. And I think we need to differentiate between the unregulated players where you don't know who's trading and who's betting versus places like Kalshi, which is Americans only, fully transparent reporting.
What's the difference between betting on Robinhood, for example, using the Interactive Brokers derivative contract versus betting on your exchange?
We have way more contracts. So they're doing one market, we're doing a whole suite. We have, I think close to 100 now. We have much more liquidity. So on there, you can take maybe $10,000. On Kalshi, you can take millions easily without moving the price. And I'd like to think we have a much better product. You can enter and exit on hours. There, you can only enter. We have better margin methodology and so on.
When you look at the folks that are doing this, and you said, so Trump is up by how much?
62%.
62%. And what do you think that represents? Do you think that will be an accurate representation on the day after of where things ultimately land? How do you sort of calculate this sort of theory of crowds here?
So it's a great question because I think people are confusing the odds that these markets are giving us with polls, right? So people are saying things like Trump is up by 24 points, and they're confusing that. So if Trump is up 24 points in the polls, that's like a 100% chance of winning.
Right.
It's done.
Right. That's not.
This is not what this is saying. This is it's a coin flip with a bias. It's a biased coin flip, and now it's biased, by 60-40. So it's still a coin flip. It's biased though, but 40% chance of winning is not 0% chance of winning. It's 40%.
Right.
What do you do after the election with this platform that you've created?
So I think we always think that these markets, these prediction markets, or any markets, they're marketplace. A marketplace have what we call like an activation energy, or they need a critical mass. Once you hit that critical mass, they kind of work because people share them, the press talks about them, everybody uses them for, will Eric Adams, we have that market, be ousted as mayor of New York? Will TikTok get banned next year? Will the Boeing CEO get fired? You become to use them as a source of truth for anything. And I think the election is sort of this holy grail event that gets you that critical mass.
Do you think this is going to change everything? You think all of a sudden now, here's a real question. So right now we're talking about your market and others as I don't know if it's a moment of truth or something, but as a metric.
Yeah.
Do you think that we are going to start using whether Mayor Adams is going to lose his job or whether TikTok, as you said, is going to be kicked out of the U.S. and whatever that stat is, that we will be talking about that stat oftentimes at this table in the future.
Well, I think you
like
can answer that question better, but
well, I'm wondering just sort of where this all moves.
I think the thing is like I think definitely now that people are used to this idea, right? It took a little bit of time for people to getting used to the concept of odds and how these markets price the future. Like what are they saying about the future? Why not, right? Like, I mean, this is the whole part of the mission. Is like now when you're asking a question of will TikTok get banned, who are we relying on to get that answer? Now there's a market-based mechanism for us to look to.
I guess my question is, do you think it influences behavior? The same way that polls could potentially influence behavior, and the reason that we don't talk about exit polls until after the polls close on election night.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a question of reflexivity, right? Like the market is trying to gauge the chance of something happening, and you're asking me, does the market itself change the actual chance of something happening? I think there could be scenarios where that happens, and that's possible. Right? And an example is we have a market on the Fed interest rate, and we know that actually the interest rate swaps, they do actually influence the Fed decision. We've known that for years. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's actually good that we don't have a surprise and a shock every single time when these things happen. And I think these markets could do that, right? Like,
but they don't become self-fulfilling prophecies? I mean, that's what I think we're getting at here, right? That it actually does influence the outcome. That the markets can ultimately influence the outcome. It's actually a very interesting sort of philosophical, conceptual idea. Right?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to take it example by example, right? For interest rates, I mean, in some ways, but that's already existing.
For interest rates, that makes sense because the Federal Reserve, the FOMC, wants the market to not be shocked. So they are kind of engaging. If the market's not reading it the way they want, they may come out and start talking ahead of time to try and convince the market. So it's a slow and gradual thing.
What's the House right now? Do you do the House too? House of Representatives?
So the House is actually, I think it's 50-50.
50-50.
And the Senate is deeply
right. And then a sweep on certain polls is almost 50-50.
Yeah, the sweep is 50-50 now because I think it's
for Republican.
For Republican, and then you also have the swing states. So I think
swing states are out of control.
He's
like
up in all 6. Right. He's closest in I think Nevada.
Does it matter? Does it matter that I see when people criticize Polymarket, they say Americans aren't almost as if because they can't vote, they have no idea about the election or how they want to bet. In other words, do you think because Americans can vote and because voters can now play Kalshi, is that more accurate than if no U.S. voters are voting or are betting?
So what I would say is what you have with Kalshi is you have I do think Americans is better than non-Americans. I do think so.
You do.
And then the second thing is you have more guarantee on Kalshi as a regulated marketplace that there is no manipulation.
Right.
Anything could happen on unregulated venues.
Let me ask you two other questions. In terms of payouts, how are you going to do the payouts? What is going to be the deciding factor in terms of who wins? When will you get the payout? Is this going to go on for months? Is it a judge that will have to adjudicate this?
Yeah. That is a great question because you spent 6 months on this. We had to hire election law and election integrity experts. We had a team actually working on the payout. So the Kalshi market is actually the only one as of now, and I think it is actually the most certain one out of all the markets that are out there. It settles on January 20th, not on November 5th and not on January 6th, because we realize actually the election is not decided up until then. The only determining factor, the only decisive thing of who won the election
who gets inaugurated.
Is who gets inaugurated. Anything before that is not actually final. Even when Congress certifies a winner, that can be contested in courts.
Okay, so the payout will not come until January 20th.
Correct. But people are getting paid 4.1% interest on their bets as it's sitting. So a lot of people most people are okay with that. And they can exit if they wanted to at 99%.
But so do you think there will be a lot of people sort of arbitraging this situation?
I think people will arbitrage the situation if they think there's like a small percentage chance that whoever won or whoever was called by AP and so ends up being overturned for some reason, which is possible. I mean, we saw what happened in 2020.
What happens to your business if Polymarket and some of the other big players that are outside the U.S. now ultimately are able to somehow register their businesses here in the U.S.? What happens to you?
I have yet to see an example of an unregulated business operating outside of the bounds of the law being let in. I mean, you had the CFC chairman here, and he had his own thoughts about the unregulated offshore platforms that are operating illegally.
what I've said multiple times is this pulls the CFTC into the role of being an election cop. Because if there is manipulation of these markets, if someone does take a position, long or short, which would essentially be on a candidate, and then potentially puts out news that's not necessarily true, this could spiral into a situation where you have manipulation of elections.
You think they're operating illegally?
I think
that was a suggestion that I think you just made. If I was reading,
I think any offering,
I'm not even reading between the lines. I think I was reading the lines.
Yeah, any offering to U.S. customers without a license by the CFTC is blatantly illegal. That's what I will say.
I don't think they're doing that. Do you?
I can't comment on that, but there are a lot of reports about this. Now, what I will say is we are extremely excited about more and more legal and regulated competition in this space. That's a good thing. That's educating people about the space, and I think making the space.
Do you think there are a lot of Americans that are playing the markets outside of the U.S. illegally?
I can't say for sure, but I mean, you see it. There's a lot of people on Twitter that seem to be participating in all sorts of markets, including Kalshi.
65-35 still sounds like a coin flip, kind of. But then how would you translate that into? Like someone wrote in, I don't know if this is true, that's a 2-touchdown underdog. Can you translate it into what kind of points would you be getting on a 65-35 football bet? Is it really 2 touchdowns? Because that 2 touchdowns is a lot better than a coin flip. Although it can happen. I've seen any, Villanova.
It depends on how much time is left.
Villanova beat Georgetown. Anything can happen anytime.
Yeah, it depends on how much time is left in the game. But you're 2/3 up. I mean, you have a 3-sided dice. You're rolling it, and 2 sides out of 1 come out Trump, and 1 of them come out.
We all remember 2016 when it went from 98-2 to 98.
And that's possible, right? Like I always say 2 things. It's like 40% chance is not 0. That's actually pretty high.
Yeah, it's high.
And second is 9 days. Like 8 to 9 days is very long in these markets. Like where we were 8 to 9 days ago it's close to 50-50 actually.
Yeah, especially with what we've seen this election season, especially with the concerns about what could happen with AI or something.
There's so many news, a lot of misinformation on either side, and a lot of crazy things happening, right? And so I think over the next week I expect a lot of big events to land, and that will move the probability either up or down.
Tarek, thank you for coming in this morning.
Thanks for having me.
That's the podcast for today. Thank you for starting your week with us. Squawk Box is hosted by Joe Kernan, Becky Quick, and Andrew Ross Sorkin. Weekday mornings on CNBC starting at 6 a.m. Eastern. Get the best of our show right in your ears when you follow us here on Squawk Pod, wherever you get your podcasts. We'll meet you right back here tomorrow.
We are clear. Thanks, guys.